Pleased to be joined by Brittany Martinez, Tal Eslick, and Eyewitness News has been interviewing several different governor candidates, and I'm proud to make this announcement that we are set to endorse you watching those full four interviews on our website, BakersfieldNow.com. Can't make any endorsements outside of that one, but I want to endorse the fact that we have some really good interviews, really long interviews as well, about 30, 40 minutes that you can go ahead and watch. The people that we brought in so far, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, then two of the leading Republicans in this race, Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco, in addition to a lesser-known Republican from San Diego, Brandon Jones. I think the best place to start is this overarching place with Kamala Harris, because I feel like every poll that we've seen, she's somewhere between 25 to 45% in those polls. She's yet to announce. Brittany, I'll start with you. What impact does she have on declaring in this race? On the way everybody runs this race, not only Republicans, but members of her own party that have already jumped in.
I think if she decides to run, she's going to have a lot of Democrats nervous. She wasn't able to, she clinched the nomination yesterday, or excuse me, last year with the Dems. I guess Democrats didn't really have a choice because she was sort of anointed the nominee ultimately. But a lot of people in California still have a lot of love for the former vice president. I think that if she does she was already a United States senator, and I think if she decides to throw her hat in the ring, you're going to have a lot of people who are Democrats bowing out or deciding not to announce after all. As far as Republicans, I think that they'll have a lot to run against. She was vice president during President Biden's term. We saw the highest inflation in over 40 years during that time, as well as some other economic things and other things that we can point to as Republicans. But the state of California is a blue state, so ultimately, I think it's probably going to be a Democrat who pulls it off again, at least this time around. And if it's Harris who decides to run, it'll probably be her. I think she has a good shot. I don't know. I don't know if I want to make any predictions because every time I make a prediction, I'm wrong, but I think she'd have a good shot at it. How about we leave it at that?
Sure, and I think that's a good spot to leave that because it's interesting with her favorability, or excuse me, the way that she's leading the race is remarkable, but her unfavorability is also pretty high too. Just basically leaving it as she has a little margin to run as far as attracting new voters, or maybe it's disenchanted Democrats that are not quite sure whether or not to jump on the Kamala train just yet as far as 2026 is concerned. Tal, when you have someone who is the leader in the polls but has that high an unfavorability rating, does that show that, you know what, this thing is not quite sealed just yet?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I think a high negative, um, a negative sort of feeling amongst the electorate on in the part of any candidate just shows that she's well known in California. And the reality is she's very popular in California to this day. That being said, I think every day that she doesn't throw her hat in the ring is another day that the other folks in the race are, making, earning endorsements, doing the work you do, even when you have to run in such a big state like California. So I don't understand the thought behind delaying the decision. If she doesn't run, it'll make a little more sense. If she does run, I don't see the logic in sort of dragging it out. I did notice that a couple of the existing gubernatorial Democrat candidates were actually at her speech a couple of weeks ago in attendance. So I would find that hard to believe that they would be kind of under her tent with her, with the expectation they would either run against her. So don't know whether or not she's going to run or not run. I think she would be a sort of clear the field sort of candidate on the Democratic side, just because of the, billions that were spent in the presidential election where you have, 100% name ID in a deep blue state that she won by a significant margin just a short time ago during the presidential election.
It seems like the big three Democrats that are maybe most familiar with our viewership, being Antonio Villaraigosa, who we did our interview with, in addition to him, Javier Becerra, who has indicated that he doesn't have any plans to jump out of the race at this time, and of course, former California Attorney General, former HHS for the Biden administration, and then also Katie Porter. They don't seem to be budging about whether or not they would jump out of the race. We've heard private things from the Porter campaign that perhaps she would, but publicly she said, I'm stepping toe to toe with whoever. And of course, she's obviously feeling a little bit sour from what happened to her in the Senate race when it seemed that the Schiff campaign pulled up Steve Garvey to kind of avoid the D versus D runoff in that Senate race to fill Dianne Feinstein's seat. Long story short, if even if this wave of other Democrats, especially those that are close to Newsom, up in Sacramento, maybe more familiar in the Bay Area, even if they all pull out, she still has a few people that, from the Democrat side of the aisle that could pull numbers away from her. Brittany, do you think that any of them have the ability to pull Democrats away in large amounts? Or if she's getting more than 30% of the vote, is it likely she's a signed, sealed, delivered for a runoff?
I mean, if it's 30, which I wouldn't surprise me, I'd say that obviously that's a great place to be. That's where anyone would want to be. But of course, I think that people are going to be able to pull some votes away from her. But the problem is, even statewide, no one's going to have the same name ID that she does, because she is a former senator and a former vice president of the United States. And, maybe we have some other elected officials who've been in high office, but they're not going to be as well known as her, which is a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? If people decide, you know what, we've tried this, it didn't work out for the VP when she's running for president. Maybe it's time for something new, some fresh leadership. But also, I feel like a lot of the time we're always saying we're ready for some new, fresh leadership, and that's not necessarily the case as the results come out after the polls. So I think that she'll be in a good spot. I'm sure that, no voting group is ever a monolith. I'm sure people will be able to pull away from her. But I think that she's going to be in an okay position running.
And, and then Tal, I mean, that question as well that Brittany brought up, just about being in a good position. I think my observation from Villaraigosa, this dates back to during the start of COVID when he was appearing on, or excuse me, towards the ending of COVID when he's appearing on Fox News talking about getting California restarted again. He comes here, talks about how gas is still an important part of the Central Valley. How much is he looking for? Okay, maybe there's the disenchanted Democrats, but maybe there's also room for me to pull people from the Republican side of the aisle as well, Republican voters that would typically be turning out for a stronger Republican candidate.
Yeah, I think Villaraigosa is a interesting character in that he's not sort of pigeonholed from an ideology standpoint. I think the last couple of years he's sought to kind of cast himself as sort of open to working with business and kind of a get it done sort of character. I know he does often harken back to his times of as a mayor, right? So as mayor, you kind of interface directly with constituents and you're dealing with the homeless crisis directly. And something that I think voters, that credibility that voters would appreciate, um, especially in light of some of the push and pull between the state and local government, specifically on the issue of homelessness. So I do think Villaraigosa brings something a little bit unique. I don't see what lane former HHS Secretary Becerra brings. I feel like it's sort of just echoes of the Biden administration. It would seem odd that you'd have a cabinet secretary running against the vice presidential candidate. And then Katie Porter, I think she has some like passionate, deep support. But again, I don't see what her lane is that isn't. I mean, I think I don't know what would change between her running from Senate and failing against what is now Senator Schiff to now. I don't know what's gotten better for her. And I do think in the event that you have a couple of strong-ish Republicans and a couple of strong-ish Democrats, you do have the ability for a Democrat to advance against another Democrat and having a top two, where someone like a Villaraigosa could absolutely pull Republicans, disenfranchised or otherwise, because voters will be faced with the binary decision between, former Vice President Harris and Antonio Villaraigosa. So all the Republicans, many of whom despite, the 38% that voted for President Trump, would be forced to go, many of them, with an Antonio Villaraigosa as opposed to former Vice President Harris.
If there was ever a competition for waffling between which office to run for, Rick Russo may be leading that charge because it's very unclear whether or not he's going to run for mayor or governor. You think it's got to be one of them. He continues to post on social media with criticisms of how Mayor Bass has run Los Angeles, how things are going in from the Sacramento in terms of response to the LA fires. Of course, his business affected by it slightly, and of course, in his community, he feels the need to be that person that's present. He lost the mayor's race back in 2022 to Karen Bass. He has argued not to have a recall or support a recall of Mayor Bass, which is quite interesting, perhaps suggesting things about tax dollars that would not be the best use of them to have a recall like that. Maybe he's thinking maybe it's not politically viable for me either in that sort of respect. But with how much posting he's doing on social media, he's bound to run for one of these two seats. How does he affect the governor's race, Brittany, if Rick Caruso were to run for governor as opposed to LA mayor?
I don't think much. I don't mean to be rude. To be honest with you, I think we've got some people with a lot stronger name ID who are already running and decisively running for governor. And then we've got some speculative ones who have huge name ID too. And so, I don't mean to be rude when I say that, but I don't really think it changes all that much. If he does decide to run for governor or mayor, that's another thing, I guess. It's a smaller population that you have to worry about. Maybe some people who aren't quite heavy hitters just yet, they're earlier in their careers perhaps, but I don't think that it'll have all of that much change.
I've had people close to this governor's race tell me off the record that there are people that are urging him to run for mayor as opposed to governor, just based on the effect that he may have as far as the way the candidates shape out for that governor's race. Um, what do you think about this too? I mean, it seems like he'd be quite a fascinating figure to jump into this race. And why is he? I think the big question would be why is he all of a sudden feeling the need to run for governor if mayor is really what I think he would maybe possibly be best suited for based on the complaints and criticisms he's had over these last few years and the reason why he jumped in the mayor race in the first place. It feels like he ran as a much more localized candidate, relating it back to his work with the thing that I'm forgetting, the Grove down in Los Angeles, and just the way that he was seeing business affected there. That's a shopping center. It seems like an odd shift and pivot for him to jump into the governor's race, but one that maybe has some appeal being a moderate Democrat, the way that he is a former Republican as well. Tell your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think he's got a lot of ground to cover, a tremendous ground to cover from a statewide perspective. The vast majority of Californians, I don't assume have any idea who he is. Um, in light of the fires and Mayor Bass's handling, it seems like there could be at least some opening there if he wanted to, although he's kind of played relatively nice with her and even done some appearances with her. And the reality is, there are a number of examples of folks with basically unlimited resources trying and failing to pursue these political positions. I mean, it's in California specifically. I mean, Steve Poizner at times, Meg Whitman, Mayor Bloomberg, and his efforts on the presidential front, where he plowed tremendous resources and it just didn't work out too well. I do think the temptation for folks to do something similar to what President Trump has been able to do is something that folks with a lot of resources that have had a lot of business success see. And that model, although nationally President Trump's approach has, been unique and successful at times, I don't think that translates to anything in California. So this sort of like, I've been there, I've done that, I've built things, I understand the government, I've been a donor, I've been a Democrat, I've been a Republican, and that's why you should, put me in charge in the state house. I just don't think there's a lot of examples of Californians being willing to do that, to take that leap, and for that matter, for folks in LA to either. So I don't see the path, but usually can't discount someone who has effectively unlimited resources as relates to politics, at least.
And Brittany, I think for you in this question, now we want to pivot to the people that we've had in studio, in addition to Mayor Villaraigosa, as far as the Republican side of the aisle, with Steve Hilton and with Chad Bianco. With Steve Hilton, he is running this race very much on the idea of let's fix affordability in the state. Let's make things better for people in California, which at this point, you even have Democrats who are looking at the way that the state's been run so far and saying, well, we got to do that too. Javier Becerra, one of them. But in Steve Hilton's lane, he talks about first $100,000 of your income won't be charged with state income tax, things like that. Also, just trying to boost as much business as he can for gas and oil to basically offset the costs of the current gas tax in California. So, the long story short, uh, is there a lane for him to run in California for governor when you have a launch party that also includes Vivek Ramaswamy and Charlie Kirk? It seems like those two things could possibly offset a little bit, and also the slogan that he seems to be jumping on as well, which is "Make California Golden Again," a play, of course, on "Make America Great Again."
I could be wrong on this number, but I think that Trump got 5 million votes in California this last election. And if you're just looking at the size, like the population size of states, 5 million is a lot bigger than some of the states out there. That would actually be, I think, because I looked this up because I was really curious about it, 25 out of the 50 states in population size, just the amount of people who voted for him in California, right? Or maybe that's registered Republicans. Maybe I'm twisting that a little bit. But regardless, 5 million when you think about it. And so I do think that there is an appetite for that sort of more traditional leadership when it comes to conservative policies. I think that a conservative message would be a winning message in California. But here's the problem is name ID and being able to have a lot of money behind you. I think that what's going to happen with this Republican candidate, as it happens every single time, even last time around for Senate, it was against someone who was a former Dodger and had some name ID, right? Is that you don't have a lot of money to run in this big state and to get that name ID. I think it's going to take an Arnold Schwarzenegger type figure to be a Republican running in California to win. And I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. I think we are often talking about what a problem child California is. I saw something today that we're $128 billion in deficit, I believe it was, in California. And that's when we have like some of the highest income taxes, gas tax. I mean, taxed up the wazoo, and yet we're still in all of this deficit. And so I think that we do need different leadership. I don't think someone who has the support of Vivek, who failed very miserably in this last election, is not going to be a failed gubernatorial candidate in Ohio, is the way to do it. But maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know. My predictions aren't always right, but I come back to me 2026 and tell me how wrong I was. I don't think I'll be wrong about this one.
And then Tal, I think for you here with Sheriff Chad Bianco, I feel like it's a very appropriate person to ask you a question about, given both of you have mustaches. But also the other thing too with Sheriff Chad is that he is running on the common sense approach, which is the tackling Prop 36, or excuse me, promoting Prop 36, which is where he kind of gained notoriety on TV screens for a lot of people across the state last year, promoting this law enforcement reform to tackle drug addiction, homelessness, and of course theft in the state. Passed in all 58 counties. He's, of course, running on that momentum as well, and being that person that you saw and you can associate with that movement. Now, he says his approach is more the common sense thing, like what we were just laying out with Prop 36. He says, I'm approachable. You're having somebody like Steve Hill, and everyone knows in the state could use some different policies to make the state more affordable. This is the common sense approach of me knowing California well as a lawman. What chances do you think he has that makes him a better candidate or worse candidate than Steve Hilton as this race continues to go on?
Thank you for acknowledging the mustache thing. He's definitely in the group text with all those of us that have strong mustaches in California. I don't know the man. I've not spent any time with him. I think it's very clever for he or any Republican candidate, for that matter, to attach themselves to a statewide measure that passed with high numbers. So Prop 36 was far more popular than the Republican Party in California, as an example. So I think that's strategically smart on his part. Whether it's Sheriff Bianco or Steve Hilton, the challenge is that you just have a very difficult hill to climb in deep blue California. I think the reference to Schwarzenegger is a good one, that you need to find someone that sort of transcends the popularity of any political party, certainly the Republican Party. And those, it's folks like The Rock and Oprah. It's these figures that aren't Republican, as far as I know, but can again rise above the political divide, where most voters will just kind of blindly elect whoever whatever jersey they happen to be wearing at that given time. That being said, I do think some of these Republican candidates, and to a certain extent, some of the Democratic candidates that aren't the former vice president, they get in a bubble, they go to their events that they organized, and they get encouraged, and they forget that there's tens of millions of people across the state, right? So it's like if I tried to convince you guys that old country music is very, very popular among all subsets of our society, and that tequila is the best liquor for sure among everybody. Like, that's based on the people that I spend time with, in my opinion. It's not necessarily true. So I feel like that's the risk that some of our Republican candidates, that place where they find themselves. And again, the reality is it's very difficult, if not impossible, at this time to win statewide with the Republican tag on your on the ballot.
Well, of course, here Bakersfield with the Bakersfield sound, of course, old country style music is the best here, and of course
Dwight Yoakam, Buck Owens. No, you're right.
yeah, Merle Haggard, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and anybody who's watching this from somewhere other than Bakersfield, absolutely come down and visit. We might be able to convince you on that point. One of the biggest things from Chad Bianco, Steve Hilton, and a number of these other candidates Two has been the disconnect between the state legislature and seems to be their voters in a number of these races. One of the biggest things that we see in a number of these congressional districts and, or excuse me, assembly and Senate districts, one of the biggest things that we've seen recently has been this bill on 16, 17-year-olds that are not included with an automatic felony for sex trafficking. Uh, Tal, I know that you have some sort of connections too at times with the state legislature. You work with people that are there. You're very familiar. What was your take on this whole debate and this basically 2, 3 week saga that showed Democrats prioritizing a backroom deal instead of the interests, it seemed, overwhelming interest of members of their own party, and then also the Republican delegation in the California state legislature. And even Governor Newsom, I should add that as well.
Yeah, I think there are some issues that, and let's consider the venue, right? If we're in a college class and we're debating the policy merits of criminal justice reform or how DAs are able to pursue crimes, whether they be misdemeanors or felonies related to assault, and in this case, I guess um, human trafficking, prostitution, whatever terminology we're going to use, that's a debate worth having and probably very interesting in a classroom setting. The reality is 2025, even in California, politically, this issue is an absolute nightmare for anybody in charge. I think it was very clever politically for Republicans, and I think Shannon Grove, Senator Grove from Bakersfield, deserves a lot of credit for lifting this issue up. They are in a deep minority. Republicans effectively do not make policy in California. However, they were able to push this issue, fairly or unfairly, to the forefront and force Democrats to take a position publicly on it. There's nuance there, as there should be, but the reality is politically, there isn't much nuance. It felt like Democrats were defending folks that were taking part in human trafficking, and Republicans were trying to raise the issue to come after those folks in a way and put them behind bars. That may be completely unfair. I don't know the policy well enough to say. But what I would describe this as, if I was talking to the client, is we have to shoot the hostage. Now, it sounds very violent and unnecessary, but the fact is, Democrats needed to put that to bed quickly. And maybe they should have come up with a more aggressive measure, which to their values in criminal justice reform and each issue being held a little bit differently. And there probably are 18-year-old males that are dating a 17-year-old girl and they do something stupid and those should be handled. There's nuance. But again, politically, if you want to retain your position of making policy in California, this felt like a mistake and very ham-handedly and poorly handled by Democrats. And good on Republicans in the deep minority to make themselves very relevant for a period of time. But I think the Democrats may have stepped in on this issue, and it may stick around for a little while and impact a few of those very targeted competitive seats, I think mostly in Southern California.
And then, to your point, there's actually, I believe, an additional amendment just that was added to the piece of legislation for that specific 17, 18-year-old case. Brittany,
Okay.
to you, how much of these, I guess, as we're kind of talking about, how much of these situations should Democrats be avoiding as it goes to running midterms in 2026, where they're looking at, even from a congressional point of view, outside of the state legislature, they're looking at Representative Valadeo seat, they're looking at the OC seats, they're looking at the Riverside seats, and they're saying this is the opportunity here to capitalize on that, put the pressure back on the Trump administration. Even though it's not the same legislative body, it's the association by party. And of course, it may even have an impact on the governor's race as well. How wise should Democrats be in navigating these waters should similar issues arise in the next year and a half?
As Tal was talking, it had me thinking that both parties are really bad about just saying no, 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 no. And AOC, not a big fan of her necessarily, but AOC has even gone, I think, on Fox News and said, like I tell my Democrat colleagues all the time, that just because a Republican is suggesting something, just don't automatically go against it. Especially when we're talking about Congress and that the federal level, when Republicans have the House, White House, and the Senate, and obviously the Supreme Court too. So yeah, I think that Democrats should be really careful over these waters they're navigating. Obviously, they have the super majority when it comes to the local stuff and the state stuff, but when it comes to Congress, I think um, we'll see what midterms look like and how the Trump agenda is working for the people or not. And if there are things that are coming out of it that are good, that people are really happy about, I think they have to be smart about positioning themselves in a place like, oh, I support, like, don't lie, but like if you supported a bill, like, oh, it was bipartisan, like I supported this bill, I thought it was important. And also be able to separate yourself though, because a Democrat liked a Democrat for a reason, right? And be able to say like, but I also support these other things. So I think they need to be careful about not shooting themselves in the foot if there does happen to be good policy that comes out of the administration, but also they need to figure out in this moment, we keep saying it, the Democrats in disarray. I think a really easy and maybe natural thing to do right now is point to Republicans and just say they're the enemy, Trump is the enemy, every Republican is the enemy, because they don't know who they are and they have yet to define themselves. So I think they really need to focus on one, defining themselves. And then if there's good things happening, be able to sort of ride on those coattails where they can. And if it's all gone to you know where, then really be able to differentiate themselves because they've been able to find themselves and say, this is what I and what we as a party stand for, versus all of this chaos that you've seen come out of the administration that it has a super majority essentially like in the federal government.
Yeah, there's always stories updating across federal government what's going on over there. And as far as, not knowing who people are, at AOC's rally with Bernie Sanders, of course, here in Kern County, Bernie Sanders referring to Congressman David Valadez, Congressman Varadero. Maybe that's a guy somewhere else, across somewhere else in the United States. I'm not sure. Maybe up next, he went up to Sacramento and started talking about Kevin Kyrie, or came back down here and talked about Kevin McCaddy. Who knows? It's just so many different people
So
to keep in mind when you have the same speech and you got to say it in a couple different cities. But
dumb speech
um,
comes so hard.
yes, but yes, if you want to watch that interview with David Valdea, we did that last week. They talked about Medicaid benefits. We've been covering that story as well. And as for these or for these governor interviews, go to our website, BakersfieldNow.com. We have all four of those out now, and you can watch segments like this also on our website on YouTube as well. So thank you so much, Brittany and Tal, for stopping by today.
Thank
Happy
you.
to be here. Thanks, Will.